platform, when we interviewed the Department of Social Equity, we asked, explain to me, what is a typical beneficiary of social safety in St. Lucia? And she said, she thought for a while, and she said, most likely, she's a single mother with 3 kids living in a dilapidated structure somewhere in the Hmong. And to make it worse, she might have a visiting partner who is unemployed. And I thought, wow, when it rains, it really pours. So we are proposing a modern government-to-people system where direct deposits are placed into the recipient's bank account. We highlighted various challenges with such a system. Of course, there is the obvious issue of financial literacy. To what extent will they be able to use the card and all of the technology that Ghislaine discussed? In terms of regulatory framework, it should be part of national social security law of St. Lucia. It should not just be a policy or a set of standard operating procedures. The technology, we're proposing a card-based closed-loop system that Ghislaine explained, and she highlighted some of the challenges, so I will not go and review some of the challenges associated with such technology. And in terms of admin taxes or introduce new taxes, we could reallocate some expenditures towards this program, and one that we have spoken about a lot is the issue of blanket subsidies on LPG and basic food items. So here is a case maybe to use a more targeted approach for doing that. The other area we identified for that can be used is probably the introduction of a new tax. In terms of private financing, we looked at possibly approaching some regional agencies, World Bank and so forth, and we note that St. Lucia is currently undertaking the Human Resource Resilience Project, and I think this will help us tremendously. In summary, we note that there are issues in every stage of our current social safety net programs. From registration, we note that it is a manual system. We have fragmented implementing agencies. And to solve that, we are proposing the establishment of a single central social registry. In terms of assessment and enrollment, we note the lack of a robust criteria for assessment. And as a result, we have a lot of selective selection. As a solution, we are proposing the establishment of a social advisory board. In terms of the payment structure, we note that the existing payment structure is a physical structure somewhere in a notebook, and it does not allow for monitoring and evaluation. And in response to that, we are proposing the digitalization of payment systems and investment in suitable infrastructure. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much, the team. Let's put that one together for them. You know, when she said finance, we have not forgotten you, I heard the persons in finance said yes. So, yes, on behalf of them. Okay, so we continue in, and right now we'll have our discussants to comment on the paper, and thereafter the audience will be given the opportunity to make the comments or ask the questions. So discussants, go ahead.
All right, thank you very much. I would like to start off by congratulating the team for what I think is a very comprehensive paper. Jelaine, Rosemary, and Dana. I think they deserve another round of applause for what I think is a very good. Anyone picking up this paper will get a full understanding of St. Lucia's social safety net system in one read. So I think that's a good indication of how well the paper was written. I will just have some comments. I think a lot of what is recommended there, I think it's very timely because the government is already embarking on the human capital resilience project, which seeks to remedy a lot of these challenges that you highlighted. I think where your paper particularly comes in and adds value is to the payment solutions, the electronic payment solutions, and so I think that's a very timely intervention. As far as I'm aware, there is a donor in the Caribbean Development Bank who's already looking at taking our social safety net beyond just just going digital, but then dealing with the payment solution aspect of it. I would like to say that from a theoretical standpoint, I think the people looked at a lot of empirical evidence, but I think you wanted to look at social protection, which is much broader than social safety net. So social protection captures your cash transfers, your active labor market programs, your social insurance, and social protection and social safety net is not just these traditional ones. I mean, being married is a social safety net. Having a SUSUs and so on are forms of social safety net. That community that supports people, and so on. The rationale for going digital, I think the fact that it brings in financial literacy is a good one. But I think the issue, you didn't mention the issue of the digital divide that currently exists. I mean, some of these persons most likely will not have these access to the softwares and so on. I like the fact that it also kind of controls how they spend, because right now you give someone $400, but they can go buy alcohol, they can go buy cigarettes. So you sort of have a control over whether they invest in or spend in things that will invest in their own human capital. I like the fact that you mentioned the transaction cost, because that's a big thing. When somebody leaves the library and they come up here, the cost just to access social transfers is very exorbitant, and it eats away at the whole transfer. In your objectives, you said to determine the efficiency and coverage of social protection programs in St. Lucia. When I saw that, my expectation was that you would look at each of the programs and see what is the administrative cost for administering the program relative to the actual transfer reaching the individual. So once I saw that, I said, well, yeah, that would be a very good rationale for consolidating programs. But I didn't see that. I did not see that in the paper. So that perhaps is one area for extension. I think Dana noted the fact that we moved from 2,600 households to 3,600 households, and that's largely not of a whim. In St. Lucia, I think our indigence is at 1.7% of population, which is 3,600 households. So I think the rationale for social protection and cash transfers is to capture your indigent. And so historically, we've been under coverage by the 2,600. So COVID provided an opportunity to expand it to cover the full indigent population. Hopefully that, well, with errors of inclusion and exclusion, there may be persons who are left out of that. I think also I wanted to just mention the relationship between the Granger causality, which I think is a very novel attempt to show that bi-directional relationship. I have some difficulty accepting how social transfers can impact GDP. I don't see, I have some difficulty in terms of that relationship, but your Granger causality largely, you mentioned it, I didn't see anything beyond that. So I don't know, maybe you want to look at this a little more. I don't know, I've never seen that happen in the literature. So, but I think it was a good attempt, it's a novel approach. I would like to say that social protection is a big thing now. As a matter of fact, the World Food Program, which is big on social transfers, was given the Nobel Peace Prize this year for the work it's done in social protection globally. And so that there's a recognition that social protection is a critical thing. You mentioned shock responsive, how to make it shock responsive. I didn't get you didn't elaborate on shock responsive in a sense. You know, you may want to have mentioned in terms of hurricanes, how can you get transfers a lot quicker to individuals, and so on. So I didn't see that in the, given that your title mentioned shock responsive, and so on. I always see the point in a case of a hurricane, if you give social, if you see the 15th is when you give the monies to the poor persons, and the hurricane is hitting on the 12th, a very adaptive social protection system should disburse that monies before the 15th so they can stock up and that kind of thing. So, and I think with an electronic system, you can do that. The other issue I also want to mention is we spoke a lot on I guess, on the monetary transfers, but I think one of the issues we've seen with poverty not being reduced in St. Lucia is the fact that is unidimensional just on monetary and monetary poverty, but what we really have is multidimensional poverty in terms of person's health, person's education, and that has to be beyond the money transfer. Although I know that your papers focus just on the operational aspect of that. Let me not belabor the point here anymore. I think I would have touched on my final comments. I think I was expecting a little more in terms of more on the poverty analysis. I wanted to see more on the, so the issue around poverty prevalence versus poverty depth. So you may have a poverty line at 6,443, and someone may be just below the poverty line. A government can say, if I want to say that I reduce poverty, let me just give these persons who just about below the poverty line that cash transfer to lift them off. But then it's a moral decision. Why am I giving these persons and persons who are really at the bottom, who have that depth of poverty, should I be lifting them up? So I wanted some more robust analysis around that sort of trade-off in terms of that. But in all, I would like to say that this was a very good paper. Lastly, the issue of conditionalities. I think that's a big thing in social protection now, because what you want is you want to incentivize a person to invest in their human capital. So you give a mother cash transfers so that she can ensure that her children goes to school, and so on. So we needed to have that conditionality in there. But all in all, is a novel approach, and I would like to thank the team. Lastly, some of the references you made, they have some references closer to home, like Jamaica, their PAF program, Belize, and Grenada have social protection programs that are very much in line with what you are suggesting in terms of the payment solution. So I would like you to perhaps look at that. But all in all, I think it's a great paper, a great attempt, and I would like us to just give them a round of applause for what I think is a very, very good piece of work.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Descott. So now we have Ms. Mary Wilfred for comments.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I want to applaud you ladies for your presentation. Very commendable indeed. You're able to lay bare all the deficits and the deficiencies in our social safety nets system. Also, your the recommendations as well that you made with regards to ways that we can improve our system right now. Some of the areas I want to highlight is with regards to the research question, GDP and social safety net. One of the things I realize is that not enough figures were given in terms of, apart from the PAP, the Public Assistance Program, when we looked at what the other ministries were doing, like the book bursary and SSDF, the school feeding program, what is, how many millions does that account to, so that we're able to have some figures in our head as to what is it exactly that we are pumping into these programs. The other thing as well is the translation of this poverty 25.3, I believe you said. Who are these people? Okay, how many men, how many women? Are they young people? Are they people who are disabled? Who exactly are they? So we can sort of have a picture of the people that we are targeting in our society. I was happy that you asked the welfare officer who is the typical recipient, and the individual said, I think that too should be evidence-driven. Who are the people that we are targeting in our system? If we're making recommendations on mobile wallets, is it the 75-year-old man down in a phone? You know, who are the people exactly are we targeting those recommendations to? Because we can't say, let's go digital, and then when we look at the composition of the individuals on the program, they may not be able to access what it is that we are proposing. Looks nice, yes, technology is the way to go, but who are the people on these programs that are going to access this in a technological way? As well, even this morning, we're looking at people in the non-banking sector. These people that we would want to recommend for card and all of those things, you know, how accessible is that to them? And I know one of the things that when we were back at Social Transformation, when we were trying to, we were looking at the card system, was that the typical individual maybe accessing the PAP would go to a small shop in a community. Will that small shop accept the card? Or is it just for Massey or, you know, and we would want part of that money to go into those small shops as well. So we need to take that into consideration. Maybe 10 or 11 years ago, we had a seminal piece by Lauren Blanc on social safety net in St. Lucia. Key recommendation was the central beneficiaries registry. And, you know, she asserted in her findings that that central benefits registry, I think one of you mentioned it, would eliminate a lot of the things that we are seeing now in terms of resource leakage, fragmenting of the system, because her study revealed that Tommy could access everything. He could access the PAP, he could access SSDF, he could access the books, he could access all what is available, because there is no system where you can look into and see, okay, he's getting this, therefore he can't get that, or he's getting this and he can get that. So I think the team, I'm not sure if you looked at her work, I looked at the bibliography, the sources cited, and I don't see Lorraine there, and I think she's a key individual when we're looking at her work. And the last thing I want to look at is the graduation. If we are so fragmented in all these ministries giving assistance, you could imagine what can happen to graduate out of the system. So it means that I'm able to graduate out of PAP, but I'm still in something else because there's no central registry. And so if we want better results and we want to see greater efficiency in the delivery of those programs, I think we really need to zero in on graduation. I know when SLNet was delivered, Tommy, you can help me with that, part of it was how do we use a system like that to say, okay, you've been on the program for 5 years, but now that you are employed, your children have grown, they're in Martinique, they're there, they're supporting you, you know, how do we take you off in a dignified way? We're not taking you off and leave you there to suffer even more, but when we look at all the circumstances, how do we take you out of the program? How do we gradually sort of shift you from point A to point B? So I think that graduation, that graduation from the social program is very important for us to reduce the kind of wastage that we see in our social safety net programs. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ms. Wilfred. I will now allow the the authors or the presenters to respond, if any comments. Yeah.
Thank you very much, discussants, for your valuable contribution. Tommy, in terms of the coverage, we did some initial work on the coverage, but because of lack of information, we were not able to really delve into, the coverage of some of the social safety net programs. In terms of the expenditure on social safety nets, we note that as per 2021 estimates, the amount is roughly $13.6 million, which translates to about less than 0.2% of GDP, of course, with the revised GDP numbers. We welcome your suggestion in terms of incorporating more statistical analysis, and of course, with time, we will do so. In the interest of time, I don't know if any of my colleagues have any further points.
Thank you very much. Let's put on together for the presenters and the discussants as well. So now we'll have just a few comments from our audience, if any, and just would like to request that it be shortened, please, in the interest of time. So anything from our audience? Okay, we have one person. Okay, the microphone is coming to you.
Yes, to the presenters. While you engage equity and the other agencies, were there any resiliency building attached to those programs? And when you spoke to the equity officer and she explained the typical person is the mother with the 3 children, single mom, are there any programs for economic autonomy for those women? Or is it, because overall we want to see lesser numbers for poverty. As much as we want effective programs, we want people to strive, right? You want them to learn and not reoccurrence every time coming back for help. So I just had that question.
Okay, I will respond. We did not come across any programs specifically targeted to autonomy for women. That is another shortcoming that we did not mention, but there is a great need for the gender lens to be applied to these programs and to look at our budgeting for social protection through a gender budgeting lens, to tailor the programs according to specific gender needs and so on. So that would also form part of the reform. Gender mainstreaming is fairly new to our culture, to St. Lucia. We've always thought that if it's available for John, it's available for Mary, and these days, Mary and John may very well not be called Mary and John when they were born. That is the world that we are living in now. So there's a lot that we have to consider as it pertains to mainstreaming gender in how we do things in St. Lucia, social protection-wise and otherwise. So the gender approach would also need to be factored in, and that is something that we will be incorporating into the paper to improve it. Thanks.
Okay, yes, thank you very much. And we're getting some comments from our online platform, and I'm sure the presenters will be quite elated to hear those comments. So we're hearing things like, let me get the first one. The first one says, great presentation. And I'm sure that our studio audience would agree to that, if I can call it that. And another comment is, informative and noteworthy recommendations. So let's put that one together for our presenters one more time. And also, a round of applause for our discussants. Yes, in the interest of time, we will close this session here. Oh, okay, we can have it quickly.
I just want to say, whilst we appreciate the graduating from the system or the graduation from the system, without a proper monitoring and evaluating system, we just will not achieve what we aim to achieve. So we need to put proper monitoring and evaluation systems in place. And secondly, I would love to know what criteria do you all use to select who gets what? In terms of, you all said you all getting about 300 applications for maybe paying the electricity bill. You all can only do 100. How do you all go about selecting who? Because I know of situations where persons get it and they really don't need it. I will give me one chance to give you a typical example. During the COVID thing, I was part of the distribution process. So we are approaching this lady's house. She has a nice vehicle parked underneath her house. Apparently she just came from town or wherever. So she well dressed in her balcony. So she saw the vehicle coming, SLG coming towards her. The lady left her balcony. I assume she left her balcony, she went inside, she dressed in some old clothes, and then came back and accepted and left to me, she would not have gotten it. Because I refused a lot of persons. When I approach you and I see where you live, and I might be wrong, but most of the time I was right. I would not give you the basket because as far as I'm concerned, you don't deserve it. But I just wanted to know, how do you all go about selecting those persons that you all give what?
Okay, I'm not,
Yes, brief, please.
sorry, I'm not, how should I, the SLNet in itself, the test, right? I'm not sure of the fine detail as to what it actually, the questions that it asks, and so I wish Mr. Descartes was here because he was part of its design and iteration to be able to explain that. But I know that they use the SLNet and the score is derived, the person's level of poverty, and depending on the score, then you know if the person qualifies for benefits. The same for the child disability grant. When the assessment is done, the child receives a score and you determine whether the child is, can access benefits. The subjective programs, and I know we're supposed to be brief, your things like your bus, your book bursaries, your transport subsidy program, your school feeding program, that is largely dependent on the principal knowing the family or the teacher knowing the family, knowing the student, and knowing the need for the of that student. Now you will find biases. The principal and so-and-so's mother are friends, and so we just put the child on the program because it is convenient for the mother to not cook. So you will have these situations, okay? Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, it was brief. Okay, so thank you very much, presenters. Thank you very much, panelists. Let's put our hands together for them. Okay, so now we're moving right along in the interest of time, and we're moving to our second paper for this session number 2. Yes, and that will be, it's titled, What are the better practices for promoting positive mental health in students with and without learning disabilities at elementary level? And we welcome Ms. Marilyn Ogis. She's our presenter for this session. And our discussant, Mr. Janai Leos. Okay. Let's put our hands together for the discussant and the presenter one more time, please. And without further ado, let me welcome Ms. Ogis to the podium.
Good afternoon, everyone. In way of introduction, let me just tickle your brain for a little while. Think about how we describe someone who is mentally ill or who seems a bit odd. They are, we say, crazy, insane, mad as a hatter, psycho, mental, off his rocker, loony, abnormal, non-compos mentis, nutty as a fruitcake, cuckoo, daft, unhinged, bananas, loco, wacko, out of her mind, or deranged. He has bats in his belfry, a screw loose. He or she has lost his or her marbles. The list is just endless. Now, think about how we describe someone who is mentally healthy. The list is a lot shorter, right? He or she, we might say, He or she might be described as matured or self-actualized or well-adjusted. There aren't a lot of options, and they lack the pizzazz of the first list, right? Maybe that is why we devote much less attention to mental health than to mental illness. Maybe because so little attention has been devoted to mental health, we do not have a rich vocabulary to talk about it. It is probably a little of both, and it is probably also as a result of the general acceptance of the medical model of mental illness. The order of my presentation this afternoon is as follows. I've done the introduction, my motivation, objectives, definition of key terms or concepts, the literature review, methodology, student needs, factors which contribute to positive mental health in students, my findings, which would be the better practices to promote mental health in students, and my conclusion. Recent better practice research across health and educational domains assert the importance of moving beyond a problem-focused approach to embrace a more positive view of mental health. This shift involves the recognition that children's and youth's state of psychological well-being is not only influenced by the absence of problems and risk-need concerns, but also is impacted by the existence of positive factors present within individuals and their social settings that contribute to positive growth and development. As you would notice, we have so many challenges facing our young and not so young, even our old. In fact, the entire island of St. Lucia, not just St. Lucia alone, but internationally, our children are bombarded with loads of challenges on a day-to-day basis. We have substance abuse, violence, and the list is endless. My motivation for this paper is the importance of mental health cannot be understated, as research on mental health continues to play a critical role in the development of the social and emotional capacities of students, as well as being a key influential factor in the potential academic success. Due to the present situation which exists, not only in St. Lucia, like I've said previously, but internationally, research into mental health continues to grow. My objectives for this paper are as follows. 1, to gain an understanding of concepts associated with positive mental health, to recognize the benefits associated with embracing a strength-based view of students, and to enhance practices for promoting positive mental health perspectives in the school setting. Some of the key terms and concepts that I will be looking at in this paper would be positive mental health, flourishing, and languishing. Positive mental health, as defined by World Health Organization in 2010, says it is a state of well-being in which the individual realizes his or her own abilities, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to his or her community. Now, if you look at the diagram that I have on screen, you should be able to say whether you are mentally healthy this afternoon. If you are flourishing, it means that you are at the highest end of the mental spectrum, and this is the most positive state of mental health. If you are languishing, it means that you are at the lower end of mental spectrum, which is where you lack positive functioning. If you are, and you know the colors here would tell you whether you are excelling, thriving, surviving, struggling, or whether you are in crisis. And again, you will appreciate it is not written on anybody's face. So you should know where you are. The literature review. In 2017, the Mental Health of Children and Young People in England survey reported that 1 in 8 children between 5 and 19 years old had at least one mental disorder. Now, in my research, I looked at 2 models, the unidimensional view and the 2-dimensional view, or what we refer to as the dual continuum perspective. In order to effectively treat a mental disorder, it is helpful to understand its cause. This could be a single factor, such as relationship with a parent, socioeconomic status, or the way in which the individual copes with life's stressors. This single factor explanation is called a unidimensional model. Admittedly, single factors do emerge during the course of a person's life, but as they arise, they become part of the individual, and in time, the cause of the person's disorder is due to all of those individual factors which I have previously mentioned. With the 2-dimensional view, what we refer to as the dual continuum, this model of mental health continuum is extremely popular, especially in countries like England, Canada, and the United States. It was developed by an American sociologist and psychologist, Dr. Corey Keyes, in 2002. Keyes' description of the dual continua, with mental health as one continuum and mental illness as a separate continuum, is indicative that health and illness traverse along different paths. Consequently, there is need for a comprehensive plan to be put in effect that embraces appropriate activities that cater for students to strengthen their mental wellness, in addition to catering for those who are at risk of developing illness or treating those diagnosed with mental issues. Now, this is very critical at the elementary level, because if it is catered for at the elementary level, it would mean that the students will be able to climb the ladder of education, climb the ladder of success with very little problems as they're faced with now. According to Keyes, languishing is a state of being which occurs at the lower end of the mental health spectrum. It is a state, he says, that lacks positive functioning and has an emphasis on the individual merely existing from day to day. And this is from Little and Carter, 2010. Individuals who are neither languishing or flourishing are said to be experiencing moderate mental health. Individuals with the most positive state of mental health are at the higher end of the spectrum, and they are deemed to be flourishing. Most people, Keyes 2006 states, have a state of being that is located between languishing and flourishing on the spectrum, and are said to be experiencing a good life. There are distinct markers within the mental health continuum. The healthy point, as you could see, which is the optimal mental health flourishing, people who lie at this point are generally satisfied and are happy in their lives. Are we all flourishing this afternoon? They are emotionally well-balanced, stable, and goal-oriented. Then we have the problem point. This is the mid-range of the continuum, if you are looking at it. People who lie at this point may show some distress and inability to cope, but are capable of performing daily life functions. The disorder points, this is the end of the continuum, and as the name suggests, people falling under this category are unable to cope with stress and exhibit significant changes in their thoughts, behavior, and actions. When Keyes says mental illness in his spectrum, he is referring exclusively to depression. So in reality, ladies and gentlemen, it is better to subscribe to a two-dimensional model that integrates causes of psychopathology and affirms that each cause comes to affect other causes over time. Unidimensional models alone are too simplistic to fully understand the etiology of something as complex as mental disorders. For my methodology, I use a qualitative research approach. My primary research included interviews which I conducted with experienced teachers and educational professionals from elementary schools from the University of New Brunswick. At the time, since I was in New Brunswick, I had the opportunity to also interview many of my colleagues, including principals, teachers from north, south, west, east of the island of St. Lucia, and I was able to get sound information from them, which helped with my study, with my research. My secondary research included journals, articles, and other existing literature. Highlighting student needs, we have Deci and Ryan, 2008, who came up with the self-determined theory. With that theory, Ryan says that students' needs can be placed in 3 categories: relatedness needs, competency needs, and autonomy needs. Relatedness refers to the need for connections and relationships with peers, family, and other people who play an integral role in their life. When relatedness needs are met among our children and our youth, the self-perceptions may include such notions as, I belong, or I am part of a group community, or I feel included, I feel encouraged, I feel supported by others. Deci and Ryan, and Morrison and Peterson, 2010. I ask myself now, with the many students that I have taught, and with the many children that we have come across, how many of them can actually hold on to their chest and say, I belong, I am part of a community, I feel included, I feel encouraged, I am supported. Competency needs is also very important here, and it refers to the feeling of being capable of mastering tasks and developing skills within a given context by making use of an individual's personal abilities to obtain goals. Fulfillment of this need provides individuals with a sense of achievement and accomplishment. How many of our students at the elementary level are in this category and feel good that they are competent? Autonomy needs. Autonomy is described as a feeling of personal agency and ability to make your own decisions in different activities. When this need is satisfied in conjunction with other need areas, freedom and choice are expressed in ways in which respect is demonstrated for self and others. When autonomy needs are met, our children and our youth, they have that self-perception as well. And in those self-perception they have may include such belief as, I am able to make decisions about things that are important to me as well as to others. Some of the factors which contribute to positive mental health in students. We have protective factors, and these would be factors that contribute to positive development. The enhancement of protective factors requires addressing the development needs of children and youth, and it begins at the preschool years. So from the preschool years, it moves on to the middle childhood, which would be between the ages of 6 to 12, and adolescence. Then we have diversity, the student-centered approach as opposed to system-based approach. In considering the essential needs of all students, programming has moved increasingly towards an appreciation of diversity and the valuing of a broad spectrum of student strengths and learning styles. Educators increasingly think more broadly now about the diversity of our students and how students' social identities can shape their learning experiences. Very important, we have the social emotional learning, and that is development of knowledge, attitudes, and skills. Let me hasten to say that I am very pleased, even with interviewing the teachers from here and the principals, I have come to realize that there is quite a bit being done now in the social development learning of students at the elementary school level. We move on to the positive youth development. In contrast to our traditional community mental health programs, these approaches focus on the inclusion of all children and youth, rather than targeting services to those with specific risk need profiles. And one of these factors, which is resilience, is sad to say, but it is something that is very much lacking at the elementary level in St. Lucia. Resiliency is defined as the demonstration of positive adaptation of children and youth despite challenges, obstacles, or areas of risk that they may encounter in their social context and living circumstances. Recent research suggests that resilient individuals feel appreciated, they feel valued for their individual gifts and strengths. But our weakness here is how often do we allow students or help students to realize their gifts and strengths? Students who are resilient have an understanding of how to set realistic expectations for themselves as well as others. They possess positive problem-solving skills. And with the myriad of problems that we are faced with in St. Lucia now, we ask ourselves as educators sometimes, how well do we inculcate problem-solving skills in our students? My findings, which would be the better practices to promote mental health in students. I have this in 3 categories. The very first one we have is student physical and emotional safety. We need to provide support to students, especially those who may be struggling with mental health concerns within the context of a welcoming, caring, and safe school learning. Ladies and gentlemen, you will appreciate that at the school level, most of our children, this is the place where they get a warm welcome, this is the place where they get care, and this is the place where they feel safe. So, we need to assist those students so that they can go out into the communities and they can go out to the communities with positive mental health mindset to make a difference. We need to build positive mental health in students by fostering equality and inclusive practices within the classroom and school settings. We need to implement school-wide initiatives that foster the creation of safe and caring school environments. Such efforts contribute to the social, emotional, and learning needs of all students at all levels. We need to apply universal design principles in the development and use of physical spaces to ensure that all students may participate fully as learners in the classroom and school settings. Universal design principles reinforce the importance of full inclusion and the acceptance of diversity among our students. Let's look at professional learning development. We need to promote an understanding among our educators, students, and their families regarding the positive mental health needs of students. Again, if the family and the school or the educators, if there is a divorce between the two, it means that learning by the students will be affected. We need to ensure that positive leadership support and participation in the design and implementation of positive mental health policies and practices. This is where our government come into play, our policy makers come into play. We need to implement school-wide policies that contribute to the physical and emotional safety of all students. We need to develop educational policies that accommodate the learning and social needs of all students, including those with exceptionalities. Implications, school, family, and community connections. We need to collaborate with service providers and other specialists to design and provide targeted and specialized supports for students with learning and emotional behavioral concerns. We also need to establish collaborative home-school relationships through the inclusion of caregivers as participants in school improvement initiatives or as volunteers in student learning activities. And I think I must pause here to say COVID-19, no matter how bad we may see it is, has helped tremendously in that field, because what you will find happening is with the online learning, we have the entire family being involved. So even if mom is in the kitchen cooking, she could be hearing what is happening with the student and the teacher. We need to focus on developing positive working relationship with parents and members of the community, and that is relatedness. We need to ensure the development of positive school-home interactions through the provision of early school year contacts and regular communications with caregivers, focusing on understanding the learning profile of students, inclusive of their strengths, interests, and need for support. And our implications, the implications for St. Lucia, we need to address the very low levels of mental health literacy and associated stigma at the elementary school level. We have too many children suffering at the level. We need placement of social emotional learning content within the general curriculum and the design of teaching and learning practices to foster environments of support and well-being of students. Teacher education programs. Some of our teachers, I know our teachers are working very hard, and they are trying their utmost to ensure that the learning takes place, but you will appreciate that teachers too went through the elementary, went through the secondary school system, went through the tertiary. How many of us teachers got help with our mental health? And so, for teacher education programs, we need to foster collaboration, engagement and empowerment of all partners in the educational system. For example, mental health training for teachers and other professionals, especially at our teacher training institutions. In concluding, we need to appreciate and understand that mental illness seriously interferes with a child's academic achievement and their ability to form relationships. So if a child is not mentally healthy, it would be difficult for the child to build a relationship, be it with other students, be it with the teacher, be it with the family, be it with the community. In our schools, anxiety, behavior, and mood disorders are the most prevalent and are experienced by some of our most struggling students. As teachers, as frontline workers, we know that the well-being of many of our students is a concern even when there is no diagnosis of mental illness. We should aim to better understand mental illness and institute practices to promote better positive mental health. And I must end by telling you, when students experience mental well-being, they have purpose in their daily lives. They have hope for the future. They have a feeling of belonging and connectedness and a sense of meaning as they understand how their lives are part of creation and a rich history. And lastly, I want to end with a quote which has resonated with me for years as a teacher. And this quote is by Louis Pasteur, and I quote, "When I approach a child, his presence inspires two feelings in me: affection for what he is now, and respect for what he may one day become. I thank you.
Wow. What can I say? I can't say anything. So let's put our hands together for Miss Marilyn August. One more time, please. You know, that reminded me of my school days. Oh, and I forgot to say that, you would have picked up that by now, that she's a teacher, and she has been a teacher for 20 years. And so she's bringing 20 years of knowledge to us here today, concise in a few slides on the presentation. So let's put our hands together for her one more time, please. Okay, so our discussant is Mr. Leons. And Mr. Leons is the Chief Economist at the Research and Policy Unit on the Ministry of Finance. So now, Mr. Leons.
All right, thank you, Kimbert, and hopefully the Zoom and online platform persons can hear me. Thanks again for the paper, and a bit outside of the comfort zone, but then economics is the study of how human beings essentially survive, and mental health and mental illness is a key part of that survival. So although traditionally mental health may seem outside of the economic realm, I think it is a part of it, and therefore I can add, and I will try to add some value by way of commenting on the paper. Allow me to just get a few things out, and I'll probably make some suggestions on areas that subsequent papers or other areas I believe that the paper has opened up for exploration. First, I think the paper rightfully recognizes that mental health is not necessarily a binary issue, but a more complicated one. And it's a pretty comprehensive research to point to that fact. And I think more importantly that the paper is making a distinction between mental health versus mental illness. I think prior to reading the paper, I'd have just thought of mental illness and not necessarily think about mental health per se. So the fact that there is a distinction, and when you're looking at mental health, even that in and of itself is a continuum or a spectrum, I think is a good point to add, because persons do just think mental illness and sort of think of nothing else. So just making that point and that distinction, I think adds value. The paper also cited some interesting statistics in terms of 1 in 5 children and 1 in 10 adolescents during the course of their childhood or what have you, having some mental health issues. Now, the paper would have cited those for your developed societies. It would have been interesting to see what similar numbers would be within the solution context. And if it has not been done, it may be an area that we could explore, because from my read of the paper, I thought those numbers seemed high, but then I asked myself, well, what should the numbers be? And I couldn't answer that. So then there is no reference point that you could say, okay, this is what a good number should be, this is what a high one should be, and so forth. So seeing what those numbers are for St. Lucia would definitely be instructive. Now, the key question that the paper is trying to address is, what are the practices that can be adopted towards improving mental health outcomes in children and by extension society? And to achieve that, the paper is saying that you had interviews conducted by some St. Lucians and also interviews conducted by persons outside of St. Lucia in Canada where you would have studied. It would have been interesting to get a sense as to what's the relative size of the, in terms of number of persons who were interviewed, and also to get a sense as to per age, per gender, per level of educational attainment of the teachers and the persons you interviewed themselves. How did their views on what can be done to improve mental health, how did those vary by age and other socioeconomic characteristics? Because then that would tell you some information. If you are going to use the teacher as one of the avenues to improving mental health in the school area, is it that younger teachers believe that these XYZ approaches that can be taken to improve mental health, is that directly opposite to what older teachers may believe may be areas that you could improve mental health. And seeing the data along those lines would allow you to indicate that, hey, there's a gulf between what older, younger teachers think, what parents think, what principals think, and just knowing or being aware of that gulf would provide some value, because then you would know that, okay, I have an age issue or I have a gender issue as well. I think another key point, the fact that the paper recognized that the teachers themselves needed help and needed coping strategies in terms of how they contribute towards building that environment for mental health. I think that was a key point as well. And another key point was the need for stronger home-school relationships. I think that was another key point, although I would be interested to hear your views on how that relationship can be strengthened. The paper essentially put through recommendations into 3 buckets, as it were: student physical and emotional safety, professional development and learning, and school, family, and community connections. And it offered a slew of recommendations in each of those buckets. What I think is an area that can be expounded upon is, while the paper addresses recommendations in those 3 buckets at a high level, that there's a lot of scope for a few more practical or grounded recommendations as well. And just in closing, I would say that to the tail end of the paper, we are looking at the possibility of mental health influencing academic achievement. I think going forward, it is an area for us to explore, because mental health concerns may be what's driving our low CXC pass rates. It may be driving what's influencing our dropout rate. So as opposed to focusing on the subject itself and whether the subject has an issue and as a result persons are not passing it, it could be the mental health of the persons taking the exam is either the issue or part of the issue. And to the extent that you could see how large is that effect on your pass rates or whatnot, you could make really pointed recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Leos. So now we'll move to our audience, our in-studio audience, as it was dubbed this morning. And for any questions or comments, okay, we have Mr. Deci.
Thank you very much. I think this is a very interesting paper. I want to congratulate you for a job well done. Just a point, I think,
in
for
the
me.
interest of time, briefly, please.
Very brief, okay. I'm presenting next, so you. I think there's a need to shift how we view what we call deviant behavior, as opposed to developmental changes in our students. So I'm of the view that particularly young men between the ages of 13, 14, and 15, that hormonal change and so on impacts them in a certain way that they would reach out and explore, they would experiment. And teachers view that as deviant behavior, or rather this is developmental in nature. And so rather than ostracizing our young men in particular, and I say that because I had a particular experience around that we need to change our ethos and see that this is really a development, what you call a transition passage for our young men, and not ostracize them, but what they need is that support during that very vulnerable period of their life. So I just wanted to highlight that particular point, and it couches nicely with your mental health work you've done here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Deci. Unfortunately, we can't take any more questions. Sorry about that, audience, but feel free to always meet with the presenter and the discussant and discuss whatever other comments that may come up. So at this time, let's put our hands together one more time for the presenter, Ms. Marilyn O'Gills. And put our hands together for our discussant, Mr. Janai Leons. And this brings us to the end of session 2, and we'll be moving immediately into session 3. So thank you very much, everyone. And session 3 should start now. Okay. think.
Good afternoon, everyone. We're going straight into session 3, which is the sector and topics on education again. Briefly, a quote from Malcolm X, he said that education is the passport to the future, for tomorrow belongs to those who prepare for it. So we get into our first paper right away, our first presentation, and that paper is Enhancing School Connectedness in Vulnerable Youth Through Arts Education and Considerations for Education Systems in St. Lucia. Yep. This paper is written and will be presented by Ms. Chanel Justin, who is a master's student at the University of New Brunswick in Canada. Her master's program is in exceptional learning. And the discussant who will comment on this paper would be Dr. Maria Lashley, who is the department head for the New Business Innovation and Sustainable Entrepreneurial Unit at the Sir Arthur Lewis Community College. So first off, you will hear from Ms. Chanel Justin, who will present her paper. Please give her a round of applause.
Thank you very much. Just a quick question. How many of you have been involved in dance or drama, music? Just raise your hand. Drawing, painting, anything. Okay, just 2 or 3 persons. All right. So my paper is called Enhancing School Connectedness in Vulnerable Youth Through Arts Education, Considerations for Education Systems in St. Lucia. My inspiration for this paper started off with my involvement in the arts from a very young age. I've been involved in drama and dance from about the age of 12, I would say. And my best friend and I have also been involved in drama. We started a company called Drama Can, Discover, Evoke, Inspire. And what you see here are our students that have been involved in a workshop that we did 2 years ago. So I'm going to begin. Young people experience significant developmental changes, like you mentioned earlier on, that affect their social, emotional well-being, and academic performance. And though most young children transition successfully to adulthood, a minority do not. And this research project attempts to analyze how arts education can enhance school connectedness among those vulnerable youth that struggle to transition into adulthood. So the paper asks, what are the promising practices for applying arts education for enhancing school connectedness for vulnerable youth? And I also used interviews. I interviewed teachers and professors from grade K to the tertiary level in St. Lucia and in Canada. These professors taught theater and drama, arts education. So some key terms to consider. Arts education include performing arts like drama, music, theater, dance, and visual arts like drawing, painting, and sculpting. School connectedness is the extent that students feel that staff and peers in their school care about them as individuals, their academic success, and their overall well-being. Vulnerable youth, these are young people who are at risk of unsuccessfully transitioning to adulthood because they have additional challenges with fewer supports. So they face a high risk of doing poorly and they do not reach their full potential. So some examples of vulnerable youth would be youth from broken homes, youth with mental illness, teenage pregnancy, youth in foster and homeless, youth that are homeless, also youth that have disabilities. Okay, so these are the vulnerable youth we are looking at in the paper. So my evidence was categorized into 4 sections. The first one is arts education and vulnerable youth, arts education and dropout prevention, arts education meeting developmental needs, and considerations for implementing arts programs. So the first section, the first better practice statement for our education system to consider is to provide vulnerable youth with the opportunity to engage in arts education or arts programs to meet their developmental needs, which will enhance their connection to the school, family, and community. We need to adopt arts education programs, arts-infused activities and strategies, since arts education caters to a variety of learning styles, all learning styles, kinesthetic learning styles, musical learning styles, all of them. This will increase the chances of academic achievement and the discovery of untapped talents and strengths in vulnerable youth. For example, a talent that I didn't know that I have was writing. And I learned that I can write when I was at Teachers College. And that's not something that I ever discovered while I was at secondary school. Arrange professional development for teachers to be educated on the effects of violence and trauma and how to use drama-based strategies such as drama therapy, improvisation, and playback theater as a tool to cope with the specific needs of vulnerable youth. Encourage vulnerable youth to participate in socially driven performing arts such as dance and drama to develop their social skills, conflict resolution, problem solving, cooperation, and empathy. I've been teaching theater arts for over 10 years, and I always tell my students that this is the only subject that teaches you how to be empathetic, because you literally take on the role of somebody else. You put yourself in somebody else's shoes in drama, and you play out their life. So it really teaches empathy, which is something we can all do with. Arts education and dropout prevention. We need to utilize arts-infused education with vulnerable youth as a strategy to reduce their disengagement and attrition from school. This will improve their school attendance by establishing roles and responsibilities, which results in a feeling of ownership and school connectedness. I've had students tell me, "Miss, I only came to school today because we have that play to do." Point blank. We need to motivate vulnerable youth by engagement in arts education programs. Arts education creates opportunities for vulnerable youth to feel connected to an activity that challenges them and rewards them on their talents and abilities. We need to create a safe and supportive, positive classroom environment for vulnerable youth to lower their chances of suspension and dropping out of school. Teachers who promote positive spaces for vulnerable youth tend to gain respect in the classroom and foster a sense of safety, trust, and school connectedness. I always say sometimes my theater arts class turns into drama therapy, but then they feel safe because of the dynamics that you have as a teacher in theater. Arts education meeting developmental needs. We can utilize arts-based programs to meet the intellectual and cognitive needs of vulnerable youth. This will expose them to dance, music, drama, and visual arts, which has thought-provoking and rigorous content. It will also improve their analyzing, synthesizing, and evaluating skills. We can implement dance as an after-school enrichment activity to boost the physical health of vulnerable youth. Dance provides health benefits such as increased stamina, bone strengthening, blood flow, muscle memory, and coordination. If some of you do Zumba, then yes, you're getting all of those benefits. We need to establish art therapy as a mental health treatment approach for vulnerable youth. This will allow vulnerable youth to experience a catharsis, which is a process of releasing emotions and thereby providing relief from strong or suppressed emotions. And we need to create opportunities for vulnerable youth to be part of musicals, drama, or dance productions to meet their social needs. This will assist vulnerable youth to create bonds with their peers, teachers, mentors, and other professional artists. This will boost their confidence in social gatherings, making friends, and improve the communication skills. Let's now consider some considerations for implementing arts programs at our schools. We need to implement an interdisciplinary approach for professional development that will train teachers in arts-infused education as a teaching strategy for all subject areas. Subjects like English, math, and science can be taught using a variety of arts-based strategies, such as poetry, sketch, drama, music, arts, and craft. I remember having, in a social studies class, I have my students to teach me about the electoral system in St. Lucia, and they just did a skit, and it was excellent. You know, things like that should be recorded and shown on TV for other people to see. We need to publicize successful school art programs, just saying what I just said, which will create an opportunity to network with art studios, agencies, and to access trained and professional artists or tutors to revitalize the school's entire arts program. We need to advocate for arts education by making it an integral part of the core curriculum. Principals can do this by empowering visionary teachers who desire to take learning out of the classroom doors and to recognize the tremendous potential of their future dancers, painters, writers, actors, and more. We also need to hire quality art teachers who will mandate access to print technology and other resources that can further enrich current art programs. I've always said, you know, it doesn't make sense to take the English teacher that performed a poem when she was 12 to teach theater arts. It just doesn't work. So we need to hire quality art teachers, teachers that are actually qualified in the area. I'm also going to share with you some of my inspiration. Again, that's some of the work that I've done with DramaCan. I'm not sure if you will hear. No. So just a very short video. I don't know if I have sound to support.
Hi, so my name is Daniel Dubois, and I am the founding artistic director of DramaCan. So DramaCan is a performance company. We have a junior and an adult chapter in terms of groups. We focus on training, we focus on giving young persons the opportunity to train and perform using the medium of drama. We also go a lot further into things like production management within those events, stage management, etc. So I like to call it a production and performance company, and of course using drama as our tool and medium. So this year we are actually having our second annual intensive Easter acting workshop, and it has been very successful this far. We've had it for 5 days. Anybody from secondary school who had an interest in the performing arts could have attended. Students have been exposed to movement, voice, dance, and drama. I'm Nicole Samuel, and I am the dance teacher for the junior chapter of DramaCan, and I'm also in the adult chapter. The experience of DramaCan has been very interesting. I really like it. I really like what they stand for, to evoke, to inspire, and to change lives using drama. I am Chanel Justin. I am the assistant director for DramaCan. Discover, Evoke, Inspire. We believe the power of drama, we believe that drama can save lives and can basically change the world and have an impact on our country. This is our second annual Easter camp. We have invited schools from around St. Lucia to get engaged in dance, music, singing, and drama so that they can discover their talent and hopefully inspire others to do the same.
My name is Samira Charles. I'm an old member of DramaCan. I've been here from 2018, and this has been a great experience for me. I've learned many things about myself. The slogan for DramaCan is Discover, Evoke, Inspire. To me, this really connects with my inner self. It helped me discover my talents and people without those talents even more. And then with these talents, I can inspire the younger ones or wherever I am in the future and become a better man.
So that's basically what I wanted to share with you, just a student's experience with us. So to conclude, arts education has a profound impact on the developmental needs of vulnerable youth, while at the same time developing their hidden talents and strengths. Research in this area shows that vulnerable youth who have been involved in arts-based activities in high school have a greater level of school connectedness, thus they are more likely to be academically successful and undertake post-secondary education. So I'm going to share with you a quote by Pablo Picasso. Every child is an artist. The problem is to remain an artist once they grow up. Thank you.
Let's give Ms. Chanel Justin another round of applause for this informative presentation. We go straight into the comments from the discussant, Dr. Lashley. Dr. Lashley, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Justin, for the presentation. I think it has come at a very opportune time where we find in our society a lot of young people are categorized as vulnerable, and their area of vulnerability is within a very wide spectrum. So taking a look at dance, music, drama, theater arts, basically arts education, something that allows them to be able to express themselves, is of extreme importance. And also now, you see, as we are in COVID situations, you might find that a lot of our students are kind of limited in their social interaction. But this does not mean that because they are limited and they can't be in a physical space, they cannot use the internet to express themselves. And when I talk about the internet, and I'm sure dance specialists like yourselves would understand that you can get young people to watch something, a Zoom presentation, while they are still doing dance or drama or theater or these kind of things. So this paper specifically, when I was going through it, I was saying to myself, if I had had the opportunity to do any one of these things, dance, music, drama, theater, arts, maybe I'd have been a different person. Because you indicated all or a lot of the benefits of these elements in arts education. For instance, and I'll give you something that I thought was extremely interesting for me, considering I had had none of this experience. She talked about dance. And when we think about dance, we just think about students who, you know, have that ability to be flexible. But the advantages that she had given here basically looked at it enhances muscle and bone strength. I'm sure you all know that. Muscle memory. What is it? Muscle memory? Now that was a new one. I didn't know there was muscle memory. Increased flexibility, stamina, etc. So we understand that there are many benefits to having arts education in schools. You must understand here that when you look at our young people who are from the elementary stage, and even those who have gone up to tertiary education, you find that they have a problem expressing themselves. There's a very serious problem when we have young people who cannot say what they need to say in the best way they can. And I'm thinking that if we bring such or infuse arts education, which is used as a vessel that would allow our young people to express themselves, we would have a better society. We would have people who are young persons who are able to express themselves freely without fear of having them say, I'm not able to say what I can say because of what other people might say about me. So we find that arts education is extremely important. But one of the things that I noticed you had touched on here is autism. And this is a question that I'll pose to you. You looked at autism, but I didn't get an understanding of why we looked at that in particular. I'm thinking that because you're looking at vulnerable youth, and if you look at the definition of vulnerability, it spans from individuals who are resilient, and I would assume that you'd put autism in that category. It spans from those who are resilient and moves down to those who are totally helpless. So I would like you to basically allow us to understand what you meant by looking at that particular area of vulnerability. But all in all, basically, this particular document, research paper, did in fact explain, looking at all the areas under arts education and the benefits of art education in schools. But one of the things I would like to really bring out, which was touched briefly on in this, is how arts education helps young people in the area of academics. Research has shown, and through my experience also as an educator, I have seen where young persons who have been able to engage in some form of theater arts or some form of arts education, they have been able to, their performance rate is much greater or much higher than those who don't have one or more, or one or two or three of these elements of theater of education, especially arts education. It has also been said that those individuals young individuals who take part in any form of arts education, they have a greater chance at performing better in maths and science. Now that will make me think, you know, if St. Lucia really put arts education into the schools from a very, very, very young, from the inception, kindergarten and up, and ensure that this education, this arts education is carried up even through to tertiary level, we would not be having such a problem with mathematics and science. Well, this is just my observation, because we do know that in many aspects of our education, we are focused mainly on numeracy and literacy, but there is nothing really to bring our youth to, nothing really to bring them to be able to come out of the shell that they find themselves in. And arts education is something that is extremely important. So I looked at this, I read through this document, and I was really impressed by the detail and how the benefits that if we were to bring arts education into the school over a continuous basis, it would basically benefit our young people, and we would have a better society where we don't have young persons living in their shell, but young persons who can come out and express themselves adequately. So thank you for your people.
Let's give another round of applause to Dr. Lashley for this very informative comment. At this moment, we give Ms. Justin the opportunity to comment or answer any questions I will pose to her.
Any questions? I'm just going to respond to what was said. In terms of the autism spectrum, we still have so much research to do in terms of how we can use arts education for students on the spectrum. However, I have taught children that have been on the spectrum theater, and the follow-up is that they are doing so well. One of my students are right now at CARE. He was at George Charles Secondary School, and he was so afraid to transition to another school. He wanted to stay at George Charles forever, because that's something that children on the spectrum struggle with, change. And drama, theater, arts education really helps them to consider working with other people and developing relationships, because children on the spectrum struggle with social cues. So there is still a lot of research to be done, and I think that's another area we lack in St. Lucia, research. Like, we need to do a lot more research in terms of our own education systems, because we have adopted solutions from the UK, Canada, and the US, and we expect it to work, but it's not working. Any questions?
All right, right now we take any questions from the audience. Anyone with any questions, any comments? All right, so thank you very much, Ms. Chanel Justin, for this very informative presentation, and Dr. Lashley for your comments. We're going to go right into the next paper, which is entitled The Returns to Education in St. Lucia. This paper will be presented by Mr. Tommy Deci. I think he was introduced to us before. He was a discussant on the previous presentation. And this will be followed, he will be followed by the discussant who will provide the feedback, which is Ms. Thavina Mathre Andrew, the Deputy Chief Economist at the Department of Finance, Research and Policy Unit. So we call on Tommy Deci to give his presentation on the returns to education in St. Lucia.
Thank you very much, Jivan, and let me just commend the Research and Policy Unit for what is another very good research symposium. And after listening to this very inspiring presentation, I was like, how can I come in and present such perhaps a boring topic? But so today I'll speak on the returns to schooling in St. Lucia using the Manchurian Union Function framework. And that was done by myself, Tommy Deci, along with Nadia Simeon and Nadine Isidore from the Department of Economic Development, Transport and Civil Aviation team. So the outline of the paper will look at just brief introduction and rationale for that paper, some stylized facts about St. Lucia's education system, a brief lit review, data and empirical methodology results, and conclusion and recommendations. So in terms of the rationale for the paper, it is largely twofold. One, there's no sort of empirical work that has been done around returns to education. And every one of us here would have gone to school, but there's a deluge of research in the global space, but there's none in St. Lucia and the Caribbean, which is something that is very characteristic of the Caribbean region. But also, I think the second reason is that since the 1948 Declaration of Human Rights, which really advocated that education is a human right, and therefore children should have free and compulsory education, should have access to free and compulsory education, St. Lucia has invested significantly in education, specifically as a vehicle for poverty eradication and as a socio-economic equalizer. And most of you here know that the jobs that you hold now is really as a result of the investment that you have made in your education. So as a result, St. Lucia would have embarked on, in terms of universal primary and secondary school policies. However, access to school is not an end, but rather a means to an end. And so globally and locally, there has been a growing evidence that schooling does not equate to learning. And so quality of schooling, how prepared our children when they enter the life of school, particularly poor children, that is a critical thing that we need to consider. So how does that tie to my whole returns to education paper? So for us, we assume that if a child experiences difficulty learning during what we consider as the foundational years, your primary and your secondary school education, we say that there will be a sort of a disincentive to invest in education beyond the compulsory secondary school fifth form. So that's one of the assumptions we're making, and I know persons may poke holes into that assumption, but nonetheless it's an assumption that we make. And therefore we say if we can show that there are tangible benefits to more schooling, we can incentivize both private individuals to school more, stay in school a bit longer, and also governments to change policies to lengthen school years for children. So this is, in a nutshell, what we endeavor to do here today. So in terms of some stylized facts, St. Lucia education system is anchored in the Education Act of 1999, which again mandates compulsory education between the ages of 5 to 15 years. And I put a question mark here because I will speak to that a little later on. It comprises of early childhood, primary education, secondary education, tertiary, and skills training. Public expenditure is on education averages about 4.2% of GDP, or 22.5% of the annual budget. And as of 2018, we had a total of 144.7 million Eastern Caribbean dollars allocated towards the education sector. Total cost as of 2018 to school a child from age 5 to 15 as per the legislation, or from kindergarten to Form 5 is a total of $62,700 there. So therefore the government is making a significant investment in a child over that duration. And this is just what the government is investing. But what about households? Uniforms, you spend school, transportation. So that may double anywhere to $150,000, a total investment in one child going from kindergarten to age 15 or Form 5. I would like to also note that St. Lucia's expenditure is in line with the 2015 Addis Ababa Action Agenda and the Incheon Declaration Education 2030 Framework for Action, where they are saying that governments should allocate 4 to 5% of their GDP on education, or 15 to 20% on the annual budget. So in terms of the literature review, I think, and I won't stay on that a bit too much, but the general literature around schooling is anchored in the groundbreaking work of guys like Gary Becker, Theodore Schultz, and also Jacob Mensah, who did a lot of work around human capital development. And that came about really when they realized that changes in GDP growth were not purely explained by capital accumulation. And so therefore they said there's other things that work, and then they started to look at technological progress and then human capital as a critical factor. I just want to highlight that even in the models around education, signaling by George Akerlof and these guys talk about signaling as education just being purely as a signal in the market, and it helps employers be able to differentiate between who are the best persons, but it may not necessarily be in terms of the skill sets that these persons possess. So in a nutshell, the free assumes that education denoted by S in what I have here is chosen to maximize the present value of future streams of income denoted by W, representing wages, up to a retirement age, less the cost associated with education. So it's really, while we don't maybe internalize that, but this is what you're actually doing. You are actually saying that you are anticipating future returns in terms of income, net the cost that you would take to get educated. In terms of empirical work that has been done around it, I think Jacob Mensah in 1974 did one of the groundbreaking work around this, and using the US Census data, he came up with a very simple model, but very intuitive, and what is now known as the Jacob or Menserian wage equation. And it looks at log of wages, and it looks at S here represents in your years of schooling, and then you have X and X squared capturing experience, and because experience has been shown to not be linear with wages, so you have a sort of a concave representation of this, and then you have your X, which is a vector or matrix of several other variables like sex, age, marital status, and so on. The standard econometric model is the OLS, although there's some problems around that because of the ability bias. Okay? And so essentially, a child who may perform better in the labor market have intrinsic abilities that someone doesn't have. Maybe they came from a parent that genetically are more, quote unquote, brighter and so on. So that's one of the challenges. And so one of the techniques that have normally been used is instrumental variables to sort of deal with this issue. I don't deal with that here in this paper. So in terms of data, and I'm not sure if you could see that, I just wanted to see that men earn on average $353 more than women in the labor market, as per the SLC HBS 2016 data set that I use. Men in the labor force are on average 1.1 years older than women, and women have 1.1 years more education than men. And we see that women are concentrated in the services sector, which are traditionally considered low paying, and that may mean that women are actually doing what we call occupational segregation, that women on their own, and maybe a cultural norm, women are going towards this sort of jobs, and instead of going to the engineering and so on, which are more high paying jobs, women are gravitating toward that. I see someone in the audience looking a little bit perplexed by that. So here I just have a graph showing you the distribution of earnings, and we see that majority of these earnings are persons earn below 5,000, and most persons have an average schooling around 12 years, and the distribution is rather normally skewed. I think it's because, again, that's government policy at play here. There's no one being necessarily disadvantaged, so you see that's a bell curve sort of representation. So I would have simply done this Manserian wage equation and run it on 5 stepwise models. We estimated, and what we saw was that in each of the models, that education had a very high return in terms of wage return, ranging from about between 78 and 155%. I was very alarmed by this, but if you think, if you are at your A levels and then you go on to a degree, the difference in your wage from what you get as an A-level person to a degree, I mean, that's significant from what you do when you do a master's. You don't even, think about there's a significant jump that you can get in the labor market. What we see is that, however, women have a higher return to education, indicative of the fact is that women have more years of education than men, as per what I showed in the descriptive statistics. But we saw that men have higher returns to experience, signaling that women perhaps enter the labor market later, since they spend more time in school. The sectors that show positive relationship with earnings are construction, wholesale and retail, transport, public administration, teachers, and so on, and accommodation, which looks at your hotel sector, albeit relatively, that particular sector is relatively low. When I tried to look at actual occupation, I didn't get any positive and significant results for specific occupations. So, having said that, the conclusions I would have to infer out of this is that, given there's clear evidence of high returns to schooling and education, it is worthwhile to induce investment in school at both the private and government level. So perhaps governments can explore lengthening the years of schooling either by introducing a sixth form or democratizing early childhood education, which means government will have to guarantee education at least from 3 to 15, as opposed to the 5 to 15 years that the legislation gives. As a side note, I think I want to also make a point that there should be a second chance built into the education sector to cater in for dropouts. And so that will allow for them to continue education. And this is a personal experience that I had. I remember there's a young man who would have dropped out of school, and then when he came to me, he said he wanted to go back to school. And by the time he wanted to go back to school, he had turned 16 while he was out of school, but the legislation says they guarantee you 15. So I went to the chief education officer and I said, the young man wants to go back to school. She said, well, the legislation says it's 15, and he's 16 now, so send him to care. But after having that sort of interaction and back and forth, eventually they agreed to send him to another school. And could you believe it? This young man graduated valedictorian of his year. He got all his CXCs. He went to A-level. And it just dawned on me how many other young men are falling by the wayside just because a legislation says it's from 5 to 15. So if we simply extended it to 17 to give that sort of 2-year window to allow them to come back into the system, we would see a tremendous, I assume, a tremendous change, and we may be able to save many of our young men. And I have that issue about development versus deviant behavior. I think that is between 14 and 15 is when our young men go through all that trauma and that sort of thing. So, so in a nutshell, we are advocating that there is a sort of inducement on the part of the government to either extend the years of schooling, perhaps with a stronger focus on early childhood development, and because early childhood has been shown to give that sort of significant returns. There's work done by one of the Nobel laureates, and he's making a point that if you invest in early childhood education, the returns are so significant, and they kind of cascade in. And so with that said, I would like to thank everyone for listening, and hand over to you, Mr. Moderator.
Let's give Mr. Tommy a round of applause for this informative presentation in a short space of time. Kudos to you. We move to the discussant, who is Mrs. Davina Mathre Andrew, who will be giving her comments and questions on the paper. A round of applause for Mrs.
Thanks very much, Tommy. Thanks very much, Tommy. I'm going to be very brief for two reasons. One, time, and one, because I got a very late notice on this paper. It was so hot from the press that I had to keep it very short. I got it this morning, but indeed it was an interesting piece to review, and I always find it very welcoming when person send paper to me. I like to review the papers. I like to see what's missing. I like to see what we could add, how we could develop and strengthen the paper. And today I'm going to just highlight some things I think that Tommy can insert in the paper. As it applies to the methodology, Tommy, I think this is, it's very sound, so I will not add anything further to that. But in the paper in itself, you stated that there was the school years, in terms of school year, there was schooling, but not learning. But the paper did not define learning. If we could define schooling and we could define learning or distinguish between the two, it would add value to the paper. Also, you articulated that additional year of schooling, I'm not sure then, sorry, if an additional year of schooling would actually result in learning. And that could be discussed as well. And you, in your conclusion, you mentioned that additional year, you propose for it to be in the early childhood years. And you made mention of the workforce, and then if you spend additional year of schooling, that you'd get an additional income or higher income relative to somebody that did not have that additional year of schooling. So I'm wondering where should we actually place that additional year? You also spoke of the expenditure to the government, and if you're talking about expenditure, you know you have to speak to Tavina, because I like the government expenditure. I like to talk about it, how we can cut it, of course. That year of expenditure, what does it mean? That additional year of schooling, what does it mean for the government now? Does it mean extra, the teachers, for parents? What does it mean? And what does that extra year really gives in terms of value? Sorry, I'm being a little, like, I'm a mother and I'm picking up my cost as well for that additional year. But what does it mean really, cost over the benefit? And where is it better placed, that extra year? And you could add to the literature, your literature did not speak about you did mention it in the conclusion that theoretically, it stated that if you have the additional year of schooling, but your literature did not point to it, so you could add it to it, so that would significantly improve the paper. But of course, the paper study, especially the education pieces, they made mention that we need some reform in the education system, or we need to think through about the policies. So this is the right place to speak of this. Let's just hope that the ebook that we have coming forward, and then the policy makers would get to hear what we have to say at some point. This is the third year. Let's hope that they get to hear what we are saying, because it seems that we really need to revamp our system with education, credit, and all the others topics that we did make mention today. So I will send any further comments to you, Tommy.
We will allow Tommy the opportunity to respond right away.
Thank you, Tavina, for these very insightful remarks. I think I did not distinguish between schooling and learning, and I should have done that. The issue regarding parents now thinking about if I recommend an additional year and the cost, and that's why we see the two alternatives: either you do it on the additional year in secondary school, or you do it in terms of universal early childhood education. And I think universal early childhood education is something that's more palatable in terms of parents still see the value of their children going to universal early childhood education. And I think the government needs to invest there, because clearly not all our children are in universal early childhood education. And what happens is that these poor children who don't access this sort of early cognitive stimulation, they enter the primary school level not prepared. And so the gains, well, that impact of that loss of years in terms of cognitive stimulation, it is very difficult to catch up in a sense. And so while I would have referenced maybe Form 6 and also ECE, I'm more slanted towards an ECE as opposed to a Form 6 type of addition to schooling in St. Lucia.
Just one more thing, Tommy. I'm just looking at my notes, and one more thing. In the literature, I would, if we could say, but how do we really measure learning?
Yeah, well, that's a very difficult question. How do you measure? And I guess I need to go back and see. There are standard metrics, and I guess they have standardized tests that you sort of use as a metrics as a benchmark for learning. You understand? But it's something that I need to probe in a bit more. But as it stands, you can really measure the number of years somebody spent in school as perhaps a proxy that they are learning more, or they would accumulate more human capital as a result of being in school a bit more.
All right, we will now take any questions from the audience in the meanwhile. Okay, we have one question to the middle of the room, and then we go to the next.
First of all, let me thank you, Tommy, for your paper and your presentation, and a very interesting topic, a topic that has concerned many of us in various ways, not necessarily fitting nicely into that framework. But really, what is, mindful of the fact that we spend about 4.2% of our GDP on education, and we are on track to be in keeping with what the Addis Ababa's recommendations, right? And 20+% of our budget. And I was very interested, against that background, to look at the findings, and you indicated that the Jacob Minserian wage equation indicated that there's a significant benefit from a longer time at school in terms of wage equation. I have some other thoughts that I think I really like to see this work extended to deal with some questions. First of all, one of the policy decisions we have made in this country was to introduce universal secondary education. And I would like to see a study that looks at the impact of universal secondary education on national productivity. There is a view that notwithstanding that opportunity, which allows for more people to spend more time in school, that should correlate, ceteris paribus, to some increase in productivity as there will be some learning taking place. We're not sure yet if that is borne out by research and evidence. You alluded to the rationale for, increased learning, and as it relates to, again, national economic output, and how the economic models, such as the endogenous growth model, for example, uses human capital as that variable that basically changes the trajectory and in terms of total productivity. There is the other phenomenon that I am really interested in, is what I call it the treadmill effect, where more people are going to university because it's more available now, but the markets are not growing as fast, and the entry wage or the clearing wage for any sector seems to be trending downwards. So you have a situation where the cost of educating yourself to get an entry-level education, either a bachelor's degree and in some cases further, has been trending upwards, getting more expensive to do a first degree or bachelor's, although these days we have online options that's helping. But the burden on the student having return is quite high against the wage, the income of that student. So what we're seeing is that, for example, as markets mature and you have more and more of a particular profession, and the market has absorbed as much as it can take in that particular area, we realize that the wage basically has downward pressure on the wage. So at one time when you heard a few people did computer programming, these people were scarce and they were able to enjoy significant benefits from investing in education. But as the numbers increased and they became very, available, or the numbers increased, the benefits dropped. So I think we need to look at, you could see education as a product in any sector that has a certain curve in terms of you can be at different stages depending on the stage of the market. As markets mature and entry increases, the return drops. So we need to be careful about the assertion because there's another dilemma that we need to look at. The experience, how much does the market reward experience against certification? Now, you did indicate, I noticed that you had a quadratic term or really a second order term in the model. There's the concave relationship, nonlinear relationship that overcompensated for experience. Now, that seemed to be paying more than an additional year in school. I mean, in the government service, it seems to be very apparent that persons who stayed in the government service, worked and so on, would have climbed up. The guy or lady who went to do the master's, spent some time, comes back with a burden of debt. The other one who didn't go, stayed, got experience, and they are the same grade. Or perhaps even the other one is even higher with no debt. So these are the kinds of questions that a lot of people are faced with and are looking at, really, the relationship. And I think it's an international phenomenon in terms of how markets are behaving. With the advances in technology, which simplifies formally complex tasks, allows the firm to employ lower levels of certification to get the same output, because they don't need the programmer to write a program. The program has been written, and so on. That is one of the things we have with the triumphal march of capitalism, because essentially when technology is packaged and simplified, we pay one guy to do the program, and that means that we don't have to pay many more to write it, and we can afford to employ the A-level student to do the work. So that is putting downward pressure on the wage. So I wanted to see a larger discussion that looked at these things, because we can have large numbers, because education is like a stock. But really the benefit comes from the kinetics. How does education translate into productivity, which is catalyzing transformation and driving economic growth through the use of ideas? Because this is ideas that is what we are really trying to get to basically change how we do things. I think I'll rest here now.
Wonderful contribution. We move on to the next question. Okay, with the interest of time, I don't think. Okay, it's a comment, I guess.
Yes, I was just going to ask you, what do you think about the adult literacy program instead of the one additional year of schooling, or the early childhood aspect?
Yeah, I did sort of give a look at that, but I think I was using specific data, and so the data that I had, I don't think captured adult literacy in any way. So that's why, but it's something that I think it's also quite important, so we could take a look at that also. Yeah.
All right, we have a question here from the Zoom platform. It is noted that the CSEC level shows that the number of students attaining the minimum requirements to enter tertiary education is rather low, less than 50%. So what would be the strategy to improve the quality of schooling?
Well, I think I'm not an education expert by any stretch of the mind. But I know it's an area that persons are particularly interested in. I've always felt that the approach to sort of allow everybody into schools, while it's novel, I felt as if it disincentivized children to perform and to work hard. I remember when I had to write my common entrance or CXC or whatever, there was a sort of, put that impetus and, but it's almost as if now, I go in, either way. So I think it has some of desensitized that sort of effort on the part of children. And the question is, how do we come up with a variant of a version that still allows access, but also incentivize children to put their best foot forward in ensuring that, that they when they write these exams, they take it seriously. But that's just my very uninformed view. I am not an education expert by any stretch of the imagination.
Okay, thanks for that contribution. We have an observation from the same Zoom group chat. They highlight that Cuba spends 12.8% of GDP on education, Norway 7.9%, and Finland 6.4%. So as they actually agree that St. Lucia needs to invest more in education, as the percentage spent is now in the lower end of the spectrum. So as much as they reach that level that you spoke of, they are still at the lower end of that spectrum. Any comments on that?
Well, my cursory understanding of Cuba and Norway is that I think they provide education, free education up until university and so on. So I think perhaps the 12% and the 7% you're seeing is because they go beyond primary and secondary school. They go to I know our persons at Norway can actually do a PhD largely free. So that reflects that huge budget. But in Norway, the taxes in Norway are significantly higher than what we experience here. You talk about 40 odd percent. So if we want that sort of expenditure on education, then we need to also be ready to pay the taxes that is commensurate for that sort of expenditure.
Okay, wonderful. And the final question, is there a differentiation in the returns in relation to TVET and tertiary education?
So I tried to do that in the paper. As Tovina would have indicated, I finished the paper this morning actually. So I was trying to select what is considered TVET versus the academic stream. And so that's something that I will continue to do. And hopefully I want to see what the results show vis-a-vis TVET as opposed to the academic pathways. So if the person wants, they could leave their email address and I could share the paper with them once I'm done.
And there was a further comment. The individual was just suggesting that you should consider the SALCC program as the additional years.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't want to be very specific in terms of where, in terms of the additional year. I mean, I have my thoughts about SALCC that I perhaps won't want to share here. But certainly something that we'll want to look into.
Okay, wonderful. So we'd like to thank Mr. Tommy Descott for this wonderful presentation and Ms. Thavina Master Andrew for this great comment on the paper. A round of applause for our presenter and discussant. At this point in time, we will have some brief closing remarks from Mr. Janai Leos.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you particularly those who stayed till the end. It has been a 7 to 6 hour slog, but I think it was definitely worth it for those of you who joined us in the beginning of today's session. As we said earlier, this is the third research symposium, and we are hoping to have this an annual event and to constantly innovate and have different modalities by which we can share research that has been done in the region. This year is virtual. Who knows what next year would bring and how the symposium would change commensurately. I also want to just run through a quick vote of thanks. Quite a number of persons and agencies contributed to this event being a success. I think it was. Definitely want to thank the team led by Jillian Clary King in terms of decorating the room and what have you, and Lana and whatnot for making the room available to us. So a round of applause there. In addition to that, I also want to thank the many discussants who read through and spent hours of their time working on these papers in order to provide the comments that was done during the course of today. So hands off to the discussants as well. We had Mr. Leon Bullen from the ECCB. We had Ms. Natalie D'Souza from the FSRA. We also had members of the Research and Policy team in the person of Tervina, also in the person of myself, and we also had representatives from the South Lewis Community College and what have you. So hands off to the discussants as well. I'd also like to thank the presenters. The team from the Research and Policy Unit spent many an hour and many a sleepless night working on the presentations and refining them so that you were able to get a sense as to what were their insights and why, or what motivated them to look into those areas. So definitely thank you to the team from the Research and Policy Unit, and also to some of our external presenters as well. We have educators, and we have persons from the from different societies, including Mr. Constantine from the Agricultural Department, who I think provided quite a wealth of information during his remarks as a discussant. So thanks to him and the team as well. We also have our Zoom audience who have kept with us. We have had constantly 30 to 35 persons in the Zoom chat on and off during the course of today, which for an academic session is a large number, particularly in these times. So I definitely want to say thanks to those of you who remain in the chat. Some of you, I believe, and we are seeing chat messages coming up as we speak. I'm guessing they're thankful. So definitely much appreciated. To also our team from the NTN, and also Glenn and his team and our IT department for ensuring that we have the connection to our virtual audience, and also making sure that the audio and whatnot in the room worked well. So hands off to those, Glenn, IT department, and from GIS NTN. This event was live streamed, and it would not have been possible without their assistance. So definitely a round of applause to them. And lastly, I want to thank Mr. Embert Segis, who was our keynote speaker during the course of today. Definitely want to thank him, taking time off of his schedule. He's in Barbados, but still virtually and I guess spiritually connected to the Research and Policy Department, which he was a part of for so long. So definitely want to say a round of applause to him as well. We also, in wrapping up, want to thank the OECS. They have been instrumental in helping us to collate, and we are working towards publishing the papers that were done at the 2019 Research Symposium. So we have seen first drafts of those, and they look pretty good. We expect to continue that relationship and to have the 2020 papers presented in an ebook, e-publication type format, so that these works can actually be saved and can always be looked at years from now and what have you. So definitely thanks to the OECS for that. Thank you, the audience, for staying with us during the course of today. And I believe we can end today's session on a pretty successful note. The questions, comments, and what have you were quite insightful, and we're hoping to have many, many more. I know the budget department will be presenting a few papers at the next symposium, so that's going to be pretty interesting to see. So thanks again, and we'll also be sending the presentations via email and what have you, and the posters, so persons can go through the pieces at their leisure. But thanks again, and get home safely. Use insect repellent, and yeah, we shall see you next year. Thank you.
COVID-19 has been disastrous for our economy and our productivity.
But it has caused us to reset, rethink, and innovate.
Productivity Awareness Week 2020 will focus on building collective resilience in tourism, infrastructure, and the financial sector.
Rethink our approach to the agriculture, manufacturing, and the health sector.
It calls for innovation in education and taking advantage of opportunities in the digital economy.
Telework for greater resilience and productivity.
Join the discussions during Productivity Awareness Week from October 12th to the 16th.
under the theme Building Resilience Through Collective Action.
Reset, rethink,
Innovate.
Join the discussions live on Facebook at St. Lucia, NCPC, the National Competitiveness and Productivity Council, embracing excellence.